From the Sunshine State, this is Tampa Bay's Tan Talk.
It's time for FLALAW, brought to you by the personal injury attorneys of Paranick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes. This hour will be informative, along with taking your questions and comments. Now, here are your hosts for today's show.
That's right. We are back with FLALAW live on the radio. Thank you for joining us. Hopefully you are a faithful listener and you know that we come to you live every Tuesday at 5 o'clock with your live legal call-in talk show. And of course, we are the personal injury attorneys of Paranick, Caulfield, Averill, Noyes who host FLALAW live on the radio. But we also have amazing local legal and attorneys who are always coming in, being guests on the show, talking about various different areas of law. And we love to have local experts in various fields come and talk to the community and our faithful listeners about different topics. And so if you are tuned in tonight, you're in for a treat because we do have a special guest who's back with us on the show. She has joined us before and she's back by popular demand. But before I get into who I have sitting next to me in the studio tonight, I'm going to, of course, give you a little bit of the rundown so you know how to continue listening to the show all throughout the day, or if you have to stop and you want to pick it back up later and listen to it at another time, I'll give you all that information. And then we'll jump into tonight's show, which I think is going to be very informative for our local listeners. And of course, it'll also give you an opportunity to know what our special guest does and how you can reach her later if you end up needing her services. With that being said, you know that this show is always live on the radio at 106.1 FM and 1340 AM. Of course, we're in the studios right now at WTAN, but we also are streaming on various platforms as well. So if you have to jump out of the car or you step away from your radio, but you want to keep listening, that's okay because we are streaming live right now on Facebook and YouTube. So if you have one of those platforms, then you're in luck because that'll allow you to not only listen, but you also can see us here in the studio. Me and my guests will be on tonight, of course, for the next hour, talking about tax law and various topics that pertain to some upcoming deadlines, and also touching a little bit on how they might impact personal injury settlements, which is what, you know, we do at Paranick and Caulfield. So with that being said, you can text or comment questions in those platforms. So if you're on Facebook or YouTube and you want to ask a question or just make a comment, you can do that in the comment section below the video where you see the live stream. If you're trying to find the live stream, you don't know how to find it, I'm going to tell you how to spell the first name. That way you can type it into your search bar on either Facebook and YouTube, and that should help you locate it. It's Paranick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes Injury Lawyers. So if you type in PERENICH, you should see our firm name pop up. There should be a red circle around the logo that says live. If you click on that, that will allow you to see the live feed. It'll also bring up the comment section. So you can, of course, ask a question or leave a comment in that area. Again, same thing on YouTube. Same exact name, Paranick, Caulfield, Averill, Noyes Injury Lawyers. Search there, and you should be able to find us in the live feed or also in the podcast section of YouTube as well. I know my partner, Matthew Noyes, recently added us to that. So we're making sure we can bring the show to you in various different ways and platforms. With that being said, we also do have this show that will be put up later on podcast. So it won't be live on any of the podcast platforms. But later on, if you are a legal mind or you just like listening to legal podcasts, then this is obviously the show for you. And you should follow us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartRadio, just about anywhere where you can listen to podcasts. You can find this show. It's called FLALAW on the radio. Follow us there. That way, anytime there's a new show, like I said, we do this weekly. So every Tuesday, you get a new show uploaded on the podcast platform. And so you'll be able to hear this show with our special guest on that podcast as well. And then you can also go back and find the previous show that she was on if you are curious to know what she talked to all of us about last time. So with that being said, if you do have a burning question that you just need to ask and you want to ask it live, we encourage it. This is a live call-in show, so if you want to talk to us over the air, you most certainly can. And that phone number is going to be 441-3000, area code 727-441-3000. That's the call-in number for tonight. If you have any interest in speaking with us and you're not shy, you want to hear your voice on the radio, we would love to talk to you tonight. So feel free to give us a call at 727-441-3000. The lines are open, and this is FLA Law live on the radio. Now that we've gotten that out of the way, I do have two little plugs that I want to make on behalf of the firm before we jump into who we have with us tonight and letting her tell us a little bit more about herself and her firm, and then what we are here to talk about tonight. But the two things I want to plug, and I forgot the last couple of shows, but I just want to, of course, remind everyone that we are celebrating our 70th anniversary at our firm, 70 years in business since 1955. So this has been a special year for us, just being able to celebrate that milestone. One of the first personal injury law firms in the Tampa Bay area. And so that's very, very exciting to be a part of a firm that's been around that long and still going strong, helping people in the community with their personal injury related matters. So once again, just wanting to give kudos and a shout out to the firm of Parent Caulfield, Averill, Noyes, celebrating our 70th anniversary. And secondly, we always do this annual client appreciation picnic. So if you are a client previously or currently, we are still doing our picnic as we always do, and the RSVPs are now time to start coming in. This is only open to clients. So if you're a past client or a current client and you would like to join us for our annual client appreciation picnic, please give us a call at the firm so that we can get your RSVP for you and your family. We'd love to see you. We enjoy doing that every year, getting to touch base with people that we haven't seen in a long time, those that we've helped over the years. It's always good to connect with them once a year. And actually, we do it a couple times a year. We have our baseball game in the spring as well, but the fall picnic is usually very well attended. So I'm just throwing that out there. The RSVPs are going out to our current clients. So I'm looking forward to seeing you all next month on November 8th. Without further ado, we will turn our attention to the star for tonight, our radio star, Miss Alina Miles. She is a local tax attorney and CPA who practices right here in Safety Harbor, correct?
Correct.
And she was wonderful enough to join us not that long ago, I want to say maybe a month and a half, 2 months ago, to talk to us about hurricane casualty losses and how those tax implications can matter after experiencing losses due to hurricanes, and the different ways that you can address those on your tax returns. And I thought that was extremely informative, especially having come off of, dealing with Milton and Helene, and how very, very many people in our area were impacted by those. And we can say, thank God, this has been a very quiet hurricane season so far. But at the end of the day, we're technically not out of the woods. We have until, I believe it's mid-November, somewhere around there, when hurricane season is over. December 1st. Is it December? Wow. I was trying to shorten it there, Ed. But so we're not technically out of the woods. So of course, if in fact something happens, then of course, you know that if you experience losses and you have various things that occur, things you end up paying for, and you're not really sure how that matters with your taxes, then obviously Alina Miles is someone that you can call and consult with that about those kinds of things. But that's not what we're here to talk about tonight. We have a very important topic because it's looming next week. But before we jump into this important tax deadline, for those that maybe did not get to meet you the last time you were on the air, please reintroduce yourself. Tell us who you are, where you work, what you do before we go ahead and get into tonight's topic.
Yes, thank you, Jacqueline. Thank
Absolutely.
you for welcoming me back. My name is Alina Miles. I'm a tax attorney, and my main office is located in Safety Harbor, Florida. So I recently did open a couple of new by appointment only locations,
Nice.
which I'm very
Congratulations.
proud of. Yes, including Miami, Lakewood Ranch,
Wow.
and Key West.
Good for you.
Yeah, I'm excited all about that. But I do tax work, which basically is everything IRS related, whether people that have big tax bills, tax problems, back taxes, penalties, those type of folks come to me for tax advice and assistance with settling those big debts, or international tax that is huge. And that is being triggered, where you have U.S. person with foreign bank accounts,
Sure.
foreign businesses or else. And also Florida Department of Revenue sales tax audits, people come to me, primarily businesses.
Okay. Now, some people may not know that you started out as a CPA, correct?
Correct.
What made you make the shift from CPA to tax attorney?
Yeah, I just wanted to grow. The growth and development, that's the biggest reason. But I was always curious about the law, and I just wanted to be sure too that I can protect myself, just beyond the tax law.
Sure,
Understand the law. So but growth and development primarily.
Good. And I mentioned it before. I admire all tax attorneys that do what you do, because it was definitely a very hard class in law school. I won't share again how embarrassing my grade was. But with that being said, we're going to talk about some important topics. A lot of people get a little nervous, and the IRS is not fun. To talk about taxes, deadlines, things like that can make people a little bit anxious. Yep. So before we jump into that, we're going to talk about just lighten the mood a little bit. Yep. I know you see all kinds of various tax problems come your way. I would imagine most people come to you when there's a problem and not necessarily when everything's all fine.
Correct.
And just out of curiosity, is there anything that comes to mind, just something very funny or even weird that is like, you came to you and you're like, what in the world is this? Any type of legal question or funny fact?
Yeah, tax is boring. It's not as fun as personal injury stories. But generally, everybody's asking, how do I, pay less in tax?
Of course, yes. What are the ways I can get out of paying so much taxes?
That's what everybody asks.
Yeah, I would think so. And that's probably the question that I would have too. So let's get into it then. I know many people, often will have to file extensions, whether they're, individual taxpayers or businesses, and things of that nature. And there is this deadline that's coming up next week on October 15th.
That's right.
Some people may not know what it is. Some people are probably very well aware of the deadline. Give us some background on what the October 15th deadline is and why that's important. Especially, for those people that may have filed for an extension back in April.
Yeah, so I'll just back up a little bit and mention that S-Corps and partnership tax returns were due September 15th. Mm-hmm. So extended due date for the business side of things for partnerships and S-Corps have passed already.
Okay.
So if people, let's say, come to me with 10-15 deadline, which I'll explain in a second, S-Corp and partnership return could already be late.
Yeah.
And they will be assessed penalties. But individual tax filings, 1040, also 1041 for trusts and estates, those kind of forms, 709s, gift tax returns, F-bars, people like U.S. citizen, U.S. resident, U.S. tax resident that needs to report foreign bank accounts. Those type of forms, if properly extended, are due on October 15th. So there is a wealth of forms that is due on October 15th.
Okay. And so when people are filing for these extensions, what is usually the reason for that? I mean, the only deadline that I'm usually thinking about is April, right?
Yeah.
So what would bring someone to need this type of a extension?
So to back up a little bit and mention business side of things, S-Corps and partnerships, those are due March 15th originally, and 6 months brings that up to September 15th. There is a reason to extend partnership or S-Corp return. So you probably would want to extend the business side because by March 15th, you probably don't have the full scope of information to file your tax return. Typically, that's what happens. Now, with the individual side, by April 15th, You can file or you can extend, obviously. Now, the biggest thing to understand is that extension does not mean extension to pay. Extension to file is extension to file your tax return, file your tax forms.
Okay, so what is that? How do you differentiate between that? Because I would have just assumed if I have an extension to file, then I automatically have an extension to pay as well.
Right, and that's not the case, because extension to file allows you to file your tax return before October 15th, if we're talking about individual side of things. But if you have balance due that you owe for the tax year, in my example, that would be 2024 tax year return due April 15th, then you extend it until October 15th. Your tax is still due April 15th. So you're not extending your payment of tax. Okay. Now, what happens is, typically what happens is that people are scared to file their tax return. They say, what if I'm just going to hide or whatnot?
Yeah.
You know, I don't want IRS to catch me, for example. Generally speaking, I'm not going to file and I owe a lot of tax. No. What you want to do is you want to file. Okay. And let's say you cannot pay your tax. Okay, so then you can come up with the strategy to pay your tax.
Right.
But if you ignore the tax filing completely, you don't extend it, you don't file, that's the worst. You can do to your filings to yourself.
So I think that's kind of getting to my next question, because I wanted you to really break down what the penalties or, I guess, drawback would be if you fail to pay the penalties versus failing to actually file altogether. So that's, I understand that if you don't file, the penalties are still there, correct? But what if you file and then you don't pay the penalties? Is there a difference, or is it kind of?
There's a huge difference.
Okay.
So like if you do not file, your penalty is very small. I believe it's 0.05. Don't quote me on percentage, but it's very small.
Okay.
But if you do not file and you owe taxes, that penalty percentage goes up tremendously. So there's a big difference in penalty if you file versus if you don't file if you owe tax.
And how bad can it get? Because I know you said some people are afraid and they just don't file, and they figure if I run, the IRS will never find out.
Yeah, and that's right. People need to be proactive with that, because it's better to face the problem on the front end versus hide from it. But also, in addition to penalty, you have interest accruing every day.
Okay.
So that grows, and interest itself is going to be probably as much as penalty.
Right.
So you have issue there. So it's better to file even though you cannot pay.
Okay.
That's the general rule of thumb.
And I'll get to that in a minute, because you did mention that there are strategies that you can kind of approach that situation if you can't pay. But before I ask you that, because I do want to kind of know what those strategies might be, but let's assume we do the worst case scenario.
Yep.
We don't file and we continue to, run, I guess, if you will, or try to cheat the system, however you want to say it. We just don't do it because we know that we owe a lot and we don't have the money. And so they don't take your advice. They don't file. What is happening during this time period?
So there is a penalty, obviously, that is being assessed. But also, as I mentioned, interest keeps growing on the balance, on the tax balance, whatever tax assessment is, tax number is. So the whole thing just keeps growing. And typically what I see happening is that they're not going to come to me by October 15th, the people who are running from the problem. They come to me 2-3 years later. And 2-3 years later, interest accrual is huge. So definitely anybody listening out there, if you are facing something like that, you want to, act on your problem on the front end versus the back end. That's the better way to handle it.
Right, because when you're in the thick of it and you are one of these individuals who, I should be filing, but I haven't filed, but I'm nervous about it, it's easy to just kind of bury your head in the sand. We don't think about the fact that these penalties and the interest is growing and growing and growing. So you're actually making the problem a lot worse than what it originally could have been, right? So let's then talk about the strategy, because for someone that's hesitant, like Alina, I already know I'm going to owe a lot if I file. And I don't have that money. So if you're telling me I should file, what can I do once the bill comes?
So before I answer that, let me back up on a very important point.
Yeah.
If you do not file, your statute of limitation doesn't start running. That's very important because, like, the door for the IRS to audit you
want that window
opens.
open. Yeah.
So you wanna start the clock ticking. So that's another reason to file your tax return.
That makes
now,
sense.
so many years from now, you if you don't file, the IRS is gonna come in and file that tax return for you. And guess what? It's not gonna be in your favor.
Really?
So those are additional reasons to my earlier point to file the tax returns.
Got it.
Now, if you do owe taxes, there are a couple of strategies that, as a tax attorney, generally speaking, obviously, that we can go through. And one of it is installment plan, and another one is orphan compromise. There is one, not my favorite one, non-collectible status, and I can dive in a little further on those. But those are just a few options to mention that I can help people work through to see if they can basically, if it's a person that has been neglecting their tax filings for 2 to 3 years, it's out of control. So I will be, I would be like focusing on assisting and helping that person starting to manage that bad debt situation.
Makes perfect sense. So then you said something interesting that I didn't actually realize. So if it goes on for a period of time where you're not filing, you said the IRS will actually go ahead and file for you?
Yes, they will force the tax return for you.
Okay.
There are rules like how it's going to come about. So there is like it's not going to be immediately. So like if you don't file on October 15th, if you extended your tax return, they're not going to come in on October 16th and do anything.
I mean, it's the federal government. Right. Does anything happen that quickly?
Right. Exactly. But ultimately, when they do force the tax return, it's not gonna be to your benefit, the taxpayer. So it's gonna be to their benefit. They're gonna, for example, just to give you a simple example, if you have simple business, Schedule C, you don't have LLC, let's say you're just sole proprietor, you have Schedule C, simple business. And let's say your gross revenue from selling remote controls, I'm gonna pick on remote controls, is $10,000.
Yeah.
What they're going to do is they're going to force $10,000 gross revenue and count it as your taxable income. Now, you're going to say, hold on, I spent money to buy this remote control. Right, I didn't make that. That's not my profit, right? No, they're going to force the $10,000 in my example. So you do want to file your tax return.
Because you're able to give a better picture of what your actual profits and losses were. And IRS is going to put whatever they want.
And they can come back and agree and disagree with your deductions, cost of goods sold against the remote sales in my example. But that's where the audit comes in. That's where you go through the audit and all that. But you do not want the IRS to force that tax return on you. You want to file it yourself.
That makes perfect sense. So then you made a good point, and I'm curious as to how that may matter, just because I'm not informed on the subject. So we talked about statute of limitations.
Yep.
So when you file, that opens the window, that begins the clock to run. Why does that matter? Does that mean the IRS only has a certain period of time to collect, or how does that work?
Yeah, so definitely, I'll explain in simple terms. So let's say you never file your tax return, and let's say we're talking 2012.
Sure.
Let's make up 2012 as our example, 2012 tax year. You never filed your tax returns. They can go back after you going back 2012. Now, if you filed your 2012 tax return, typically they have so many years to come back to 2012.
Okay.
So that's where that importance of filing that tax return starts. Now, so typically it's 3 years back. Okay. It can go up to 6 years if you omitted, I believe, don't quote me on the rule, but about 25% or more of your gross income, gross revenue.
Sure.
Or they can go back unlimited. They still can get you in your 2012 tax year, in my example, if they can prove fraud.
I see.
So that's unlimited.
There's really no statute of limitations.
But
when
if
it
there
comes
is
to
no
that.
fraud,
Yeah.
it's still you're limited to how far back they can go after you. If you never file, it's unlimited. They
Yeah.
can go back to whatever year.
Because you never started the clock, basically.
Exactly. You never started the clock.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense. Now, I mentioned it very briefly that obviously the IRS is a federal government department that is handling all of this. And we know that currently in our United States government, there is a shutdown of federal resources, federal departments, and various different programs, right?
Correct.
So with this deadline looming next week, how does the government shutdown impact that, if at all?
Yeah, it doesn't help the taxpayer in any shape or form with the due date. So it doesn't, because there is a shutdown, it doesn't mean that you can extend it. There is no more extension after October 15th.
Okay.
With the government shutdown, you still have to file by October 15th. That's
Okay.
the bottom line.
Okay. So then, assuming you file in a timely manner, because the shutdown does not preclude you from doing that or help you in any way with that deadline, then what about the processing of it, auditing and things like that, seeing as there may or may not be people working in the IRS or things are probably slower at the IRS in terms of that. So how does that play out?
Yeah, so my understanding is that certain automated letters are still going to go through.
Okay.
So that process is not going to stop. Now, I think like in terms of hearing back on, let's say, collection due process hearing or those kind of procedural things that might, if not paused, that might be a little bit delayed.
Okay.
And in terms of audit, my understanding is that it could be a little delay, a little pause in that. But I do not.
That's maybe some small benefit if you're expecting an audit.
Hopefully, but we do not know.
We don't know.
For sure, from the inside. Nobody knows how you're being selected for an audit, how you are being picked for. Nobody knows that. But my speculation is that part might be a little bit delayed or paused. And perhaps with the new ones, because people are still working. My understanding, people are still working.
Yeah, I don't know, and I'd have to research it. I know there's certain departments that are essential, and so they have to report to work regardless of whether they're being paid or not. I don't know where the IRS falls into that. So I'm curious to know how that's going to impact it all.
I'm sure certain departments within the IRS are still working.
Yes.
I'm sure.
I would imagine so. They can't completely shut down. So that's interesting. So those that are facing this deadline next week know that the government shutdown does not prevent you from filing next week.
No. And another important point, if you did not pay your taxes, like I said, you were supposed to pay it by April 15th. But if you think your interest is going to stop growing because of the shutdown, it's a myth.
Point.
It's not correct.
Good
it's not
point.
going to happen. So your balance keeps growing. Government shutdown or not government shutdown.
Right. That's a good point. As you mentioned, those penalties, the interest, it still accrues. And so for someone who may be clever thinking that, that should give us a little bit of reprieve while the government is shut down, that is not the case. No. Unfortunately, those IRS penalties and tax interest rates are still going to be accruing on whatever you owe.
Exactly.
Okay. Well, I think that's a good point to take a short commercial break now that we have given people a big eye-opener as it relates to the deadline next week. We'll take a short commercial break. This is FLA Law live on the radio, and we'll be back with our tax attorney, Alina Miles.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
After a car accident, there are many questions that you need answers to. Who pays for my car repairs? Who pays for the medical bills? What about my lost wages? And more. The personal injury law firm of Pernick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes has been answering these questions for their clients for nearly 70 years. Since 1955, they've been a voice of the injured in the legal system. As one of the longest established law firms in Tampa Bay, Pernick, Caulfield, Averill, and Noyes is here to answer your questions. Listen to their live call-in radio show on this channel every Tuesday evening from 5 to 6 p.m. or call them at 727-796-8282 or visit them at voiceoftheinjured.com. Offices Clearwater, non-attorney spokesperson.
This is the Tan Talk Radio Network.
And we are back. Hopefully you have been listening since 5 o'clock. This is FLA Law live on the radio. Thank you once again for joining us. My name is Jacqueline Bryan. I'm one of the personal injury attorneys that host the show for FLA Law live on the radio. And as you know, hopefully you've been listening to attorney Alina Miles, who is your local tax attorney and CPA. And we have been discussing tax and the deadline that obviously is coming up next week on October 15th. If you filed for that extension and how that comes into play in terms of failing to file or failing to address those penalties that might be assessed. With that being said, I know we talked briefly about some strategies, and I want to get a little bit into more detail about ways to, I guess, kind of minimize or even maybe potentially avoid some of those penalties. So some people may not be fully aware, and I want you to talk about this first time abatement issue and how maybe someone in Florida might qualify for that.
Yeah, so typically what I see with first-time abatement is where, let's say it's a new company, they just opened up and they didn't know that they had to file. It's a partnership because there's husband and wife.
Sure.
It's a partnership, so it's by default, by IRS default rules, it's a partnership. Partnership requires its own tax filing, and they forget or they just don't know they have to file the tax return. So it's definitely easier to do first-time penalty abatement, assuming they are in compliance with the U.S. tax laws before this happens. So it's easier to do first-time penalty abatement in this kind of case because it's a brand new company. They just opened up. They didn't know, okay? And they have clean compliance history with the IRS. So that would be a good example of first-time penalty abatement case.
Okay. Now, are there other ways that you can get relief from penalties? And if so, is there like a certain kind of cause that can allow you to get out of that penalty?
Yes, so another way to ask for penalty abatement is to file certain form, penalty abatement form, and plead your facts.
Okay.
So that's something that people come to me for, and we write it out, we provide exhibits, we explain to the IRS why they should give taxpayers such and such penalty abatement. And reasonable cause is definitely something that you can plead in your penalty abatement form and all that. And typical scenarios would be, oh, my accountant never told me that I need to. And I hear those stories all the time. They actually,
does that actually
surprises
work?
me.
Ignorance of the law works.
I don't know what it is.
I had no idea. My accountant did not tell me that I had to.
Well, ignorance of the law is not a defense. But if they came to the accountant, they said, do I need to report foreign inheritance, foreign money that I got from a foreign country? And the accountant says no, because it's a gift, and accountant applied domestic gift rules. Well, that's accountant's fault, right?
I gotcha.
Because accountant should have told them, no, you have to report it because it's coming from offshore. Rules are different. Different rules are being triggered in this case.
Okay. So then what kinds of things really have you seen count as far as reasonable cause that did actually lead to a penalty relief? I mean, is it something as simple as, I had a serious family emergency of some kind and I can't pay these penalties, or a major hurricane destroyed my home and I can't pay these penalties? Like, have you seen what qualifies as reasonable cause?
So typically it's death in the family or illness. So
Okay.
that's typically what I see. Another one is reliance on third parties such as an accountant or closing agent or whoever else to, let's say, do proper closing if we're talking FERPTA, if we're talking real estate, and that didn't go well.
Okay.
Or accountant or CPA that provided wrong advice, bad advice, whatever that, or disappeared. A lot of CPAs these days are retiring.
Yeah.
So that's happening too. I hear those stories, but those and hurricane related. If you can establish that you were impacted by the hurricanes, yes, it's something we can plead as a part of penalty abatement on the form there. Mhm.
Okay. And so just so our listeners understand what abatement means, does that mean you're totally getting the penalties waived, or you're just getting more time to pay them, or getting a reduction? What does that actually mean?
So it's important to explain that when you do penalty abatement, it's not for interest, because remember I told you interest itself could be huge.
Right, that's separate from the penalty.
Separate.
Yeah.
So you cannot, there are very narrow, you can ask for interest abatement, but there are very narrow reasons why you can ask for interest abatement. So I just wanted to clarify that. In terms of penalty abatement, yes, so you're calculating how much you think the IRS should abate, and you're just pleading your case, attaching exhibits, and the later point, you're waiting to hear back from the IRS. That's why I think the government shutdown delay is going to kick in, because I think hearing back from them on those kind of things is going to be delayed.
It's going to take longer, yeah.
Right. So basically, just getting a response from them, whether they agree, disagree, partial, whatever they decide in terms of that is what you're waiting on. Mm-hmm.
Gotcha. Now, I don't want to put you on the spot, but you mentioned there are some very narrow instances where you can get interest abated as well.
Yeah.
What kinds of things might qualify for that?
So that could be, it's okay, it's fine to put it on the spot, but that could be where IRS made a mistake.
Okay.
And so, for example, I had a case where they issued a letter and the amount that they said the taxpayer owes is it's high, and the taxpayer didn't know where that number is coming from.
Yeah.
So when I dig through the file, that reconciled the numbers. That number nobody knows. I called the IRS. Nobody knows where that came from.
Where it came from.
So if you receive some kind of erroneous advice from the IRS, erroneous notice, erroneous letter, that gives you that ground to ask for interest abatement. But like I said, it's very narrow. Our IRC code section that you have to reference in the penalty abatement form and plead your case.
Yeah. So I think, going back to the strategy of tackling these things for someone who comes to you and said, Alina, I heard you on the show. You told me not to run from this. I need to go ahead and file. And so they do that. And then, of course, they talk to you about what's the strategy. Installment agreement to me seems like the most logical thing that a lot of people may think of. I pay a little bit over time. But maybe that's not as simple as it sounds. Can you explain a little bit how that works and why it's better to pay a little overtime as opposed to not doing anything at all?
So let me just backtrack a second and explain that there is simplified installment plan or streamlined, and then there is not just regular one. Okay. If you owe, I believe the threshold is $50K, then you're probably under the simplified one. So what does that mean? How does that help? Why would somebody want installment plan, whichever way you go, regular one or simplified? It's because the collection efforts by the IRS are not paused. That wouldn't be the right way to explain it. It's more that you are in a formal installment agreement. It's not a payment plan. Like I decide to pay $100 every week. That's not installment agreement.
Okay.
Installment agreement is
That would be nice,
authorized, confirmed by the IRS and all that, agreed upon between the taxpayer and the IRS.
Right.
So that gives you basically the kind of back off, if you will, on collection.
No one's going to be beating down your door.
Right.
Yeah.
That's basically why.
No
you do
scary
that.
letters from the IRS.
But if you are in a simplified one, just by default, just because it's below 50K, they're not beating on your door as badly as if you're above that number.
Gotcha.
So that's where the difference comes in.
Okay. All right. And it's obviously better to do that, get it done over time, as opposed to letting these interests and penalties accrue and not addressing it, right?
Right. And you can look at different options because there is nothing there that prevents you from asking for penalty abatement and asking for installment plan. So you kind of have to talk to a tax attorney to see what kind of case you have and what the better option is. What some people don't understand is that if you do it yourself, and you can do it yourself, obviously you can, but the amount of money professional can save you is going to pay for itself, right? So every case is different, but and it's harder to negotiate something so many years from now versus on the front end.
Yeah.
If you do receive tax lien notice, okay, or if you do receive intent to levy notice, there is a 30-day due date to ask for collection due process hearing. Don't sit on it. You have to ask for it if you want to address the problem proactively, going back to our first point.
Yeah.
If you miss that 30-day due date, it's going to be harder for anybody, tax attorney or whoever else, to help you.
Absolutely right. And now, obviously, we talked about the strategies with how you can kind of abate or approach abating the penalties or the interest. Are there any other tips that you can think of that might help our listeners when it comes to legally reducing penalties that they might owe?
Yeah, something that comes to mind is that when you do a consultation with somebody like me, bring your tax filings, show me your tax filings. I might find a mistake.
Good point. Yeah.
And for example, if you have net operating loss that hasn't been carried from year 1 to year 2, you're overpaying taxes. You think you owe taxes. You're accruing interest and penalties on some silly oversight like that.
An error, yeah.
So in that case, you would want to amend, and you want to see if they agree with your amendment and carry that loss properly to year 2. So that could be a strategy, like bring the tax returns, show the tax returns to me, for example, if you were to come to me, and see if there is something there to discover. I mean, it's limited in scope, but things like that should stand out. Yeah.
Is there a deadline when it comes to amending? So that I think that's actually a very good point with attorneys. We're able to see things that maybe the average layperson or maybe even a tax preparer might not catch. And then, like you said, they think that they owe some massive amount of money or a big penalty when really they just misfiled. How far back can you go with amending? Is there any limitation with that, or can you amend any prior tax return?
General rule is 3 years back. General rule, but IRS has broad discretion to accept or not to accept your amended tax return.
I see.
So ultimately, it's and it's gonna it would be, I would think it would be hard to the amendment. So amendment is they have broad discretion.
Interesting. And so when it comes to their discretion, have you seen any patterns as to the kind of amendments they like and they tend to accept, and the ones that they automatically say, no, we're not even considering that amendment, and boom, you get rejected? Or is there no rhyme or reason to it?
So basically, it's case by case, but generally speaking, something to do with deduction, something to do with reducing tax liability. Like if it's something as simple as NOL, and if it makes sense, I think, the risk that they are not going to accept that amendment is probably lower. If it's something, I don't know, some kind of something something abnormality or something on
Yeah.
your tax return, something that doesn't make sense. You never like reported something before, and now you're claiming like $500,000
Yeah.
Ponzi investment scheme deduction. I don't know, something like that. So that would probably be something that they would look at further.
Yeah.
But nobody, like I can't tell you what they accept, what
Yeah.
they don't accept.
Yeah.
It's with them,
It's case by case.
case by case.
Gotcha. Okay. All right. Well, that is actually very, very informative. And so people that have filed and asked for extensions and that deadline is approaching, I hope you've been listening. I hope you have learned something. At the end of the show, we're definitely going to give you all of Attorney Miles's information so that you can contact her if you need her assistance before that deadline. I'm sure she is going to be very busy, but not too busy to be able to take your call. So with that being said, I want to ask a question because I know that this comes up in personal injury from time to time, and generally, I always tell people the general rule when it comes to personal injury settlements or even workers' comp settlements that a lot of times those are not taxable, right? However, there are some scenarios where they can be. And so I wanted to talk to you about that because I could see how our worlds can collide when it comes to this topic where people do sometimes ask, I'm about to get this large lump sum of money, and the damages are not always kind of parsed out, if you will, in the settlement agreement. So it's not necessarily going to say, well, out of this 100,000, 10 is for this and 20 is for that, and it's not usually marked that way. And so this is an interesting question for me from the tax perspective when it comes to personal injury settlements, whether it be a car accident or a wrongful death or some sort of damages that you're claiming. How do you do that if someone comes to you and they're wanting to know, is this lawsuit that I'm about to receive or that I just recently received taxable? And if so, how am I supposed to address that on my tax returns?
Yeah, so there are a couple of rules to point out here. Okay, so first of all, was the settlement. It's much easier for IRS to reallocate a part of the settlement to taxable piece, and we can talk about it in a second.
Sure.
If it's not spelled out in the settlement agreement.
Right.
So that's where the collaboration between personal injury attorney and tax attorney can be very valuable. Because if it is spelled out in the settlement agreement, there is less chance, if you will, less risk.
Sure.
Nothing is guaranteed, of course, but there is less risk that they're going to go against it.
Okay.
Okay, so that's an important point. Now,
Because they've got this document,
because it's documented,
that details
right.
what it's for.
Right.
Yes.
So in terms of what is taxable, what is not, the general rule is that if it's related to physical injury, whatever that is attached to that physical injury, could be lost wages, could be whatever else, that's typically speaking, is not taxable.
Right.
Now, if you have punitive damages,
Yes.
that's not taxable. That's taxable.
Right.
The only exception to punitive damage is wrongful death. So if it's punitive damage attributable to that, most likely it's going to be not taxable. But overall, general rule on punitive damages, and those could be huge.
Right. Those sometimes can be even larger than the physical injury damages.
Right. So
Yeah.
those are taxable.
Okay.
Now, if you go beyond that, if you go like discrimination, lost wages,
Yeah.
but lost wages not attributable to the physical one, let's say
Yeah.
there's emotional damage or whatnot, emotional injury, those things could be taxable.
Yeah,
And
that's a good distinction because a lot of people may think, and I think that's what confuses a lot of my clients, is they think, well, a big part of my case was the fact that I was injured, I had a surgery, I became disabled, and I was no longer able to work. Do I now have to pay taxes on these lost wages? And so, again, my general answer is always no. However, like you said, there's a distinction between the lost wages that we're talking about.
Right. So if it's lost wage, general rule, once again, there are exceptions, but general rule, if it's attributable to physical injury, then it's not. But if it's not attached to that physical component,
Right.
then it could be taxable.
Right. Exactly right.
And that would be treated as wage, so it would be reported on your W-2.
Right. And so then the question becomes, and fortunately I haven't had to dive into this collaboration with a tax attorney just yet in my career, but it can obviously happen for clients where, like you said, it's not necessarily spelled out, but we know there is a component that was punitive. Or let's say there's like a verdict, and you obviously have a verdict that strictly contributed a certain amount to punitive damages. How is that going to be addressed on a tax return?
So it's going to be taxable, and basically, okay, so if it's the way that IRS would look at is it would look at intent. So if it's considered wage, like lost wage in example where it's not attached to physical component is a wage.
Okay.
So it's a W-2 reporting.
So you report it just like you would any other income.
Right. So what is that punitive damage? You would have to kind of drill through and see what exactly is that. Is it pure punitive damage without any wage or what else? Anything, then it's a 1099 item. It's 1099 miscellaneous item reported on your tax return as taxable.
Oh, okay.
If it's a wage component, whichever way, severance, whatever way
Yeah.
it comes in, other than that example that I explained was
Yeah.
the physical component, then it's a wage. It's a W-2, just like you would get your W-2. So
Yeah.
you just kind of have to look at the case by case, drill through and understand what exactly are they awarding, what are you getting.
Yeah. And so I guess my question is, and obviously, not here to try to beat the system or cheat the system, if you will, but in most scenarios, especially pre-suit, where there's no lawsuit that has been filed, but a settlement has been reached, the lawyers make all kinds of arguments for damages, and we can say, oh, there's lost wages, there's medical, there's punitive, there's so many things. We argue, we reach an agreement, there's a number, but there's nothing spelled out.
You want to spell it out.
How do you decide if there's never been an attribute of how much of this is punitive? What would you suggest when you're collaborating with a personal injury attorney or a potential client to say, this is what you want to make sure you spell out in your agreement?
Yeah, so basically, obviously, it's case by case. It depends on the case. You know the facts because you're a personal injury attorney for that case. But you would use reasonable methodology, whatever makes sense. So, like, if it does have to go back, if it's going to be disputed by the IRS, you do want to stand on some kind of ground that you used reasonable methodology to make allocation. You didn't come up with something out of the air.
Pulled it out of the thin air,
right? And do Excel spreadsheet, do whatever you need to do percentages, look at like comparative court cases, whatever methodology, reasonable methodology has to be reasonable, you need to use, do that.
Yes.
But that's probably the better way to go.
Okay. Well, Alina, it has been an amazing show. It always goes by so fast. I want to use these last few minutes just so that if someone has a tax problem or they're up against this deadline next week on 10/15, how can they find you? What's the best way for them to reach you?
Yes, my number is 727-977-8270. That's the best way to reach me. My website is www.taxattorneylegal, 3 words and one, taxattorneylegal.com.
Absolutely. Great. Do you have any socials where they can find you on social
definitely.
media?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. I am on Instagram, Tax Attorney FL Florida. There is underscore after Tax Attorney _FL.
Good. I hope that you all have learned something wonderful. Again, we'll post these shows everywhere on all the various podcast platforms. You'll be able to go back and watch the live on Facebook or YouTube. Thank you, Alina, for joining us tonight.
Doctor.
We had a great show. And as always, we will see you next week every Tuesday at 5 o'clock with FLA Law live on the radio. Have a good night, folks.
WTAN, Clearwater.